Okay.
Hundreds of billions of dollars for a bunch of failing report cards. President Trump signing an EO that takes action to eliminate the Department of Education and bringing it back to where it belongs, the states.
And hopefully she will be our last Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. We're going to be returning education very simply back to the states where it belongs, and this is a very popular thing to do, but much more importantly, it's a common sense thing to do. Teachers, to me, are among the most important people in this country, and we're going to take care of our teachers. And I don't care if they're in the union or not in the union, that doesn't matter. But we're going to take care of our teachers, and I believe the states will take actually better care of them than they are taken care of right now.
But don't let President Trump alone convince you that the Education Department's useless. Teachers union boss Randy Weingartner accidentally just did it for him.
The federal education role is limited. There's no, except for, the Department of Defense schools, which are not run from the Department of Education, or the Bureau of Indian Affairs schools that are not run by the Department of Education. It doesn't control any schools. In fact, it's the states that control schools. So if President Trump doesn't like what's happening in education, it's the states and local school boards that do it.
And it's not just the Education Department that's getting neutered. President Trump is also cracking down on woke universities. Columbia has until Friday to ban masks and clamp down on anti-Israeli protests on campus. $400 million in federal funds hangs in the balance. And the administration's pausing $175 million in federal funding to the University of Pennsylvania over its transgender athlete policies, forcing women to compete with men in sports. I mean, Craig, Republicans have been talking about eliminating the DOE for decades. Trump finally did it. What took so long?
I love the way he did it. Finally, you can have kids around a president, not worry about getting eaten or sniffed. I thought it was a nice touch. How fitting that getting rid of the Department of Education is a no-brainer. Because if this were a private company, it would have gone bankrupt in 2 years. If it was a sports team and posted a losing record every year, it would have folded in 5 years. It's in their title, Department of Education. And if Randy, that's his name, right?
Yeah.
If Randy's right, then you shouldn't miss this. You shouldn't miss this. If it's like, oh, it has no effect, then great, goodbye, see you later. The crackdown on woke universities, if you look at what they're doing, he's targeting behavior that is antithetical to the human experience, right? Excuse me, men competing against women in women's sports, that's absurd. I had crackers before I came out here.
It's okay.
And then the aggressive intimidation of Jewish students, that's harassment. So he's doing the right thing. He's getting rid of this stuff. But I think there's a bigger failure going on, and it's one of maturity. If you look at the education system, the failure is contagious. We are no longer creating people who understand how other people live, and they don't even care about their future selves. So when you have a student that goes out and calls a Jewish kid a Nazi and it's filmed, that kid is hurt, but they also don't think about how does that affect me in the future? We've created a new kind of college experience, and it's called the tantrum. It's what a child does. Instead, you're supposed to be kind of enabling or amplifying the maturation process so that they can understand that there are other people in the world and that you should respect, their private property or their space. And you should also think about you in the future. How are you going to treat yourself? Because everything that you do in college is going to follow you. And I think a lot of these kids are being steered the wrong way, and they're doing stuff that ultimately is going to harm them in the future.
Everything from college follows you?
Well, I'm a hypocrite. But my bad stuff in college was, heavy drinking, right? And we didn't have cell phones back then.
Thank God. You would have been doged years ago.
Oh, my God. I wouldn't be here.
Katie, I like how the president made the point that we love teachers. Yeah. Teachers are fantastic. They do good work. A lot of them are taken advantage of by the teachers union, the bosses, and that's important to remember.
And there are a lot of teachers that are very happy about this move, that they'll have more local control of their classrooms, of their curriculum, and the money that they can use to do what they think is best for their students, considering all the states and school districts are not the same. They're very different. First, A+ to the White House for the optics on this, to have all these little kids sitting around the president in their little ties and dressed up with their desks, and then the massive Sharpies as big as their head, signing at the same time as the president was awesome. Love to see that. But the Republicans and Trump in general have taken the issue of education and turned it into a parental rights issue. You've seen this all over the country. And they're doing this today with the dismantling of the Department of Education. They're sending it back to the states based on the Trump doctrine of we expect results. And you don't get to operate for 45 years and then to have in the year 2025, 70% of eighth graders not able to read. We're doing something differently. We're sending it back to a place where the states can compete against each other for the best programs. Arizona, for example, has a great school choice program where parents can use their tax dollars to send their kids to the school that they want to. And then internationally, we have to be able to compete. We can't compete with China if we're going to not be able to produce students who can read or do math and be successful in their life. The education system in America is supposed to help children into their young adulthoods into a successful career in life. They are failing to do that.
How big of a role was COVID in today?
A huge role. I think COVID completely shifted the conversation around education. And if you look at which parties trusted more to handle education, Democrats used to have a huge advantage, and it's basically tied now. Sometimes they have a 1-2 point advantage. You saw it obviously in getting Glenn Youngkin in as the governor of Virginia. It was huge, and that Phil Murphy's reelect in New Jersey was close because of the COVID issue in education. So I would never want to minimize it. But Donald Trump just basically had a photo op today. He didn't dismantle the Department of Education. It has to be done by an act of Congress. And I know that really bums him out, that there are other branches of government. She's taking notes. Bureau's taking notes. It's going to be bad. But what he's doing is making life really hard for the DOE to operate. And that's going to have a big effect for sure. Randi Weingarten, and I've said many times, I'm not a tremendous fan of hers. What she is making clear in that interview is that the curriculums are actually set on the state level. So when you look at the lowest ranked states for education, least educated places like Arkansas, places like Mississippi, West Virginia, run by Republicans, that's on them for that. That's not on her. She's not setting the curriculum. What the DOE does and why it was created by Jimmy Carter and why probably you can't get Democrats at least to vote to abolish it is that it's a funding and civil rights enforcement organization. And when I hear Republicans out there talking about their plan for education in America, I don't hear them talking about making sure disabled kids have access to a public education. I don't hear them talking about impoverished.
Because we're against it.
I know you are. Thank you for admitting it in such a public forum. They want to end up privatizing it. They want a voucher system, which means that kids who can't get to those schools, don't have enough money to, or frankly want to go to public schools, won't have access. And they also have all of these religious kooks, like the superintendent of Oklahoma, who wants to spend millions of dollars on Bibles for the schools, Trump Bibles, because it's all a grift. They want to make it private. They want to make them religious institutions. And that goes against what you're supposed to do in America. So does it need reform? Does it need to be made better? 100%. But come on.
All the Democrat politicians,
Let me tell you
send their
You tell
kids
me.
to private
I
schools.
am going to tell you.
All
Number
right,
one,
I'm ready.
Number one, we are one nation under God, and don't make a joke about that.
Do you think there should be Trump Bibles in public schools?
Number two is the issue that the Department of Education has wasted $100 billion a year. So cut the crap. You yourself admit they don't do any education. Now, you say that Trump is not dismantling. He's already dismantled with Doge. And let me make one thing also clear. Department of Education was created by an executive order by Jimmy Carter as a payback to the unions. Subsequently, Congress came in and created it, and we're going to end it the same way with an executive order dismantling it.
You need
Subsequently, finished by a decision by Congress. Now, let's be real clear. All of these issues, as it relates to Pell Grants, special needs, all that stuff is being moved to different departments within Washington. They are not being eliminated, and don't make it sound like these kids are being forgotten, because they're not. But if you want to talk about no child left behind, if that's what the Democrat liberals believe in, that screwed us up, screwed our kids more than anything, because no kid left behind made sure that every kid passed. And now we've got kids who can't even read at 8th grade level because they were passed. We have a 19-year-old who graduated with honors who can't read proficiently. All of this Democrat nonsense labelism is for the birds. And let me tell you one more thing. The Constitution does not guarantee an education. It is not a federal right. It is not a federal issue. It is something that, under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, is left to the states. The state constitutions have provisions where you have a right to education. But this is something that is for parents and for educators, for teachers that we do love. We don't love Randi Weingarten and what she did to our kids when she couldn't find one metric in the billions of dollars that we gave her to open the schools to make it safe enough for her and her pals to go to open up those schools. You know what, Randi? Go back to Ukraine for the 3rd time to try to figure out what they're doing in education. And let me tell you one more thing. I'm not done.
One more thing.
One more thing is these kids in China and in Russia that were studying quantum physics while our kids were hiding and doing drugs and alcohol, and the kids in Norway and Denmark and Sweden. We spend more money per kid than any country in the world, and we're losing because of the Democrats. And that's the end of that.
Can I just say one more thing, since we're going to accuse the Republicans of not caring about disabled kids getting an education or poor kids getting an education? The Biden administration threatened to withdraw funding for student lunches if school districts did not force young women to have men in their locker rooms competing with them. So if we want to talk about those types of things, we can, but that's not what the president did today.
All right, welcome back into the Will Cain Show. President Trump moments ago signing an executive order dismantling the Department of Education with the goal of giving school power back to the states. Let's bring our panel, which includes Fox News at Night host Trace Gallagher, host of Fox News Sunday Shannon Bream, and chief Washington correspondent for the Washington Examiner Byron York, and the founder of Environmental Progress Michael Schellenberger. Let's start, if we might, with history. I'd love to bring you in, Byron, on this. While this is a revolutionary act, as described by Stephen Miller a little bit earlier here on our program, it is an act that has been discussed for decades, including as far back as President Ronald Reagan. This has also been at times a bipartisan approach, criticizing the existence of the Department of Education. How today, though, do you think it will be received? Will it be seen as something that is an extension of efforts for decades, or truly revolutionary?
I do not think it will be seen as truly revolutionary, because at some point this effort has to run up against the fact that Congress created the Department of Education, and you can't get rid of, a president cannot by fiat get rid of an executive department created by Congress. And it's more than that. If you look at this lawsuit that was filed a week ago by the attorneys general of a lot of states, maybe 20 states, against Trump, trying to prevent him from doing this very thing, it also talks about Congress creating offices inside the Department of Education and dictating what those offices are supposed to do. For example, Congress created the Office for Civil Rights inside the Department of Education. It is huge. Hundreds of lawyers, regional offices all around the country. And what the opponents are going to say here, many Democrats are going to say, is the president cannot close down something that Congress has specifically mandated. That is not just the department, but the offices inside it.
So I hear you, Byron, that you do not think it will be revolutionary because you largely think it will be ineffective, stopped yet again by the judicial process, by the federal district courts as a start. Let's go to you on that, Shannon. I had Stephen Miller on the program a little bit earlier, and he told me basically what they are hoping for when it comes to all of these cases is an overarching ruling from the Supreme Court that stops federal district judges from having the power to enjoin the executive. Is that a goal, do you think, that is accomplishable for the administration?
It's possible. You think about the fact that you've had Justices Thomas and Gorsuch actually speak to these nationwide injunctions, casting real doubt on whether they should exist or be reined in some way. But it's not just them. You've also had Justice Kagan back in 2022, I think it was, and she talked about this, that you can't have people forum shopping, running off to Northern District of California if you want to find a judge that maybe isn't going to be Trump friendly, or running off to maybe Texas or Florida to find a federal judge who isn't friendly to maybe the Biden administration. They put something on hold, not only for their district, but the entire country. And then while it plays out on the merits for a year or two, I mean, that would be half of what President Trump has left in this, his final term. Even Justice Kagan suggested that that cannot be the way this is supposed to work. So I think we maybe finally get to that question about nationwide injunctions. And I do think you've at least got a few justices who have publicly said maybe time to rein them in.
Okay. All right. Well, if it is effective in the short term, I'll bring in Michael Schellenberger here. This is very akin, Michael, to what has been done with USAID. There's not a moment here where there's an attempt to abolish the DOE. As Byron pointed out, that takes an act of Congress and would take 60 senators, which would include at least 7 to 8 Democrat senators. But to defund much of the Department of Education, that's what we're looking at here. The block grants, the grants from the Department of Education are the way it exercises policy over education. So can President Trump stop the funds flowing out of the DOE?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can try. I mean, I don't know what will happen with the courts. I think it's a whole separate question. But I think what's such a big deal about today is just the fact that Trump is taking this action and acknowledging that the Department of Education lacks legitimacy. I mean, the student performance has worsened over the years. Everybody knows this, and we also know that there's been all this research into alternative methods of teaching kids, when in fact the only thing that works, the thing we know works, is just having teachers in front of the classroom teaching kids how to read and do math. It's got to be teacher-centered. So it's a back to the basics moment. I hope that that's the main thing people need to realize, is that they've been doing a ton of research on how to improve education for kids, and they haven't improved on the way that they used to do it 100 years ago. And so I think that the just dismantling this department that's been a distraction, trying to train teachers in methods that don't work, including whole language theory as opposed to just sounding words out for reading.
And back here into our studios in Los Angeles, Trace, you were just sharing with me a great illustration of this fact right here in L.A.
Yeah, we have middle schools in Los Angeles that have kids on the honor roll, hundreds of kids on the honor roll, and then you do the national testing and not a single one of those children can read or write at grade level. These are 8th graders, and you think this is a travesty. This is the way it's been. And what happens is, and the president kind of articulated this, is that, and so did Stephen Miller at the top of the hour, talking about the fact that the Department of Education has become this far left organization, right? And you talk to teachers in California and other places, and they will tell you they are mandated to follow these teachers' unions. They want some freedom from that. They want some freedom from these DEI policies that are implemented from these leftist organizations, and they're looking and hoping that this will give them eventual freedom to be able to do as they were intending to do, which is to educate kids, teach them how to read and do math.
Yeah, the American public wants more power in the hands of families, in the hands of parents, in the hands of local municipalities and school districts. So while this may be a battle in the court system, we'll come back in just a moment. We're going to talk to Byron York, Shannon Bream, Michael Schellenberger, and Trace Gallagher about whether or not practically, politically, this is what we want in America. Return the power and our money back to the states when it comes to education.
My guess is that the best move for the quality of life in America in the future might very well be this establishment of this new Department of Education.
The budget plan I submit to you on February 8th will realize major savings by dismantling the Departments of Energy and Education.
I told Linda, I hope you do a great job and put yourself out of a job.
Well, President Trump today signed an executive order that begins the process of closing the Department of Education. With that, let's bring in Secretary of Education Linda McMahon. She leads that agency. We don't know for how long. Madam Secretary, thank you for the time on a rainy day in Washington. How does this work? I want to talk first about the process. What happened today with the executive order? How do you expect to get legislation to undo the Department of Education to get through something like the Senate with a 60-vote threshold?
Well, Brett, thank you very much for having me this evening. I can tell you we know that the task ahead, certainly has some hurdles. But what my desire is, and what I'm going to be working to do, is to work in conjunction with Congress. I think if we can show them that the best plan is to have states in control of education for their communities, for their students, for their teachers, for their parents, that is the best thing, because the president believes, as do I, that the best education is closest to the student, and we can accomplish that by having it operate out of the state and not trying to manage it from Washington, D.C., which clearly, Brett, that hasn't worked. The Department of Education was set up in 1980 by President Carter. We've spent almost $3 trillion. We've seen our scores continue to decline. We're doing something wrong. We need to change.
The president seemed to be very careful in what he said, that it would be done lawfully to unwind the Department of Education. And the directive, it says, to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law, take all appropriate steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education. Is there like a hedging of those words? Because, you legally can't really erase it without those votes.
Well, I think he was correct in saying that we were going to do everything legally. That's what he has said to me from the very beginning. He would like for me to move as swiftly as we can, because he believes the sooner that we can close the department, the more efficiently we can have the funds distributed to the states, and perhaps they will even have more funding when there isn't the overhead and bureaucracy from the Department of Education. But clearly he wanted to state and let Congress know that he intends to work with them. I want Congress to be a partner in this, and I believe they will be. Because both sides of the aisle know that what is happening to education in our country cannot be allowed to stand, because we are failing our students.
The left is obviously very upset about this. I'll take it from both sides, as you're pointing out. Here is Randy Weingarten. Take a listen.
A kid who has disabilities, a kid who is poor, a kid who's going to Head Start, a kid who's in a rural area. They're talking about taking this money away from kids and putting it into block grants and giving it as vouchers, which basically serve kids who are already in private schools.
So I'd like you to address that directly.
Well, certainly Randy Weingarten and I have not had any opportunity to have a conversation. I at one point heard her say a day or two ago that the president was going to take education away from children. And clearly that's not what we're going to do. We want to make education better for children. The president is an absolute proponent of school choice. And we are going to work very hard to make sure that children are not held prisoner in failing schools. Over the past couple of days, I have toured charter schools throughout the state of Florida. And I went to one school that's called a classical school, where they were really back to basics with their multiplication tables and reading by phonics, returning to the science of reading. These children were absolutely joyous in their classroom. They were having fun. The teacher was having fun. They were reciting their times tables. And this fourth grade, I'm sorry, 4-year-olds doing this. And they were just amazing. So we want to see that kind of enthusiasm and that kind of success rates in every school across the country.
And just to put some stats on it, you were born in New Bern, North Carolina, which is Craven County, North Carolina. That's a rural region. And if you look at the math and reading scores, and we have this graphic here, 21 to 24, you can see math in 21 and 22, and reading 51.6, 49.9, and then 23, 24 actually goes down, 46.5 to 48.6. That tracks other places around the country that have seen proficiency go down despite the level of money going up.
Well, I think that's been the president's, hue and cry. He said we are spending more money per pupil than any country in the world, and we're seeing less results. That's a clear indicator that we are not doing the best thing we can do for our students. I do think returning to basics is the best way to do it. We need to teach math and English and literacy and writing. We don't need to teach ideology. We have to let teachers teach. I have such respect for our teachers. I think it is the most noble profession in the world, and I have seen what can happen when teachers are allowed to teach and to be innovative and be creative in their classrooms. Brett, for every dollar that goes into the school system, the federal funding, It's been reported to me that almost 47 cents of that dollar is spent in regulatory compliance. Teachers, they don't want to stay. They're leaving the profession because they are bogged down by regulation. Let's lift that burden and let them do what they do best, which is teach.
I've played the Randy Weingarten, and from the left, Bernie Sanders, other people on Capitol Hill on the left, obviously coming after you for this, and the president for this move. Let me talk to you from the right quickly. Why send the money to the states for them to administer? States like California, New York, Illinois, who conservatives would say have not had a great track record. Why not send the money to the states as a pass-through, and then they must give the money to parents and let them pick the schools and the instruction of their choice?
Well, that's one opportunity. I think we should explore that. In fact, I heard former Secretary Bennett this morning talking about sending money directly to the students. So let's take a look at that. I think there is not, I don't think there's one thing that's mutually exclusive. Let's figure out what the best plan is. Talk with the governors. That's one of the things I'm doing. I've just started. I've only been here a couple of weeks, but I've already started traveling around the country, talking to different governors, getting them on the phone, talking with different superintendent heads to say, what can we do better? How can we help you? What kind of tools can we provide you? What kind of plans for best practices can we make available to you so that you can see what other states have done and done successfully? And that's going to be the goal. Let's make sure that we are providing as much information to our states as we can so that we can get the best outcomes.
So if you work yourself out of a job, you get the votes in Congress, what do you do next?
Well, I don't know. The sky's the limit. I do enjoy public service. This is my second time of serving in an administration. I enjoy being on school boards. I've done that. I've been on the Board of Education for a university for 16 years. You resign from those, when you join the government. So those are things I'll enjoy getting back to. But first things first. Let's take care of the Department of Education. Let's make sure our students are well taken care of.
Madam Secretary, we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Brett.
But today is a milestone. For decades, the Department of Education belonged lock, stock, and barrel to the left. Well, that's over. With his executive order, President Trump delivered a major blow to the liberal monopoly on the culture. And the few smart Democrats left in the party will watch and learn, as the crazies who make the headlines and get the clicks will just keep spitting into the headwinds. And that's the angle. Joining me now, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Governor, you said earlier this week that dismantling the Department of Education would usher in a new era of American educational excellence. How so?
Well, think about what we've had to deal with in Florida. So 4 years ago, we led on the issue of women's sports, as we typically lead. So we said we're going to protect women's sports. The Biden administration, through their Department of Education, responded by threatening to take away school lunch money for poor kids. And so what this bureaucracy has done over the years, they try to get involved in fashioning education policies in ways that the Constitution never intended. So let us make the decisions on education. We're obviously going to approach it much different in Florida than California. We have universal school choice. We have paycheck protection for teacher union dues, and many of our unions are now being decertified because a lot of teachers don't want to write the check. We also don't have woke in our curriculum. We do civics. We do a lot of different things, and it's proven to be successful.
Well, you were able to do that with the Department of Education in existence, so aren't you making a point that contradicts the need to do much with it?
What they want to do is they want to attach different strings to money. And a lot of that money doesn't even go to the state. It goes directly to school districts. And so they will be working with school districts, sometimes liberal school districts, against state policy. So we're having to do all these fights for no reason. Take the money, and the president made the point today, you can do a fraction of the money, send it to us. The dollars will go farther because we're cutting out the bureaucracy.
Randy Weingarten, good friend of yours, teachers union chief, was poo-pooing this idea that the Department of Education controls the states. Watch.
It doesn't control any schools. In fact, it's the states that control schools. So if President Trump doesn't like what's happening in education, it's the states and local school boards that do it.
At least she got her hair done. So what of that?
Well, you've been around, you understand. when you are sending money, you condition the money to certain behavior. Now, we fought against that in Florida, but we also have the wherewithal to do it because our economy's grown 30% just since I've been governor. We've got a big surplus, but not every state is in that situation. And whatever they've done thus far, which has been intrusive, they will do more in the future. And so we know this just hasn't worked. Send the money to the states. Let us make the decisions.
Congress is going to ultimately have to take the step, yes, to really shut it down.
I think what President Trump can do is I think he can, from the inside, neuter the organization. But it will not be wiped off the statute books by an executive order. That has got to come from the Congress. First, let's give President Trump credit. We've been talking about for 40 years, Republicans.
Since I was at the Department of Education.
Getting rid of it, and it's never happened. This is the biggest step by far. But the congressmen all run saying they would. You can't win a Republican primary in this country as a Republican saying you want to keep the Department of Education.
So it should be a no-brainer.
And so why aren't they voting to codify? But this is like so many other things President Trump's done. They're not codifying his immigration executive orders. They're not codifying these things. So while this is good policy in the instant, we want it to stand the test of time. Congress has to be the ones to do that.
Will they? Do you think?
If history is any judge, probably not. I mean, we're talking about the courts. The court's as good as anyone.
Limit the jurisdiction.
Congress can limit the jurisdiction of the courts. That is plain in the Constitution. It doesn't require 67 votes in the Senate. You can attach it to a CR. You can attach it to a must-pass bill. And here's the thing. If somehow you tried to do that and maybe it just didn't work, then I think our voters would at least understand. They're not even trying any of this stuff.
It's infuriating.
We knew these leftist judges were going to do what they're doing. Everybody predicted that. President Trump knew that. This was one where the Congress is basically, and what are they? They're on 2 weeks of vacation now. Really? That must be nice.
Yeah.
I think they got a lot of work to do.
Most of them are in your state of Florida vacationing. Governor, hey, great to see you as always.
Thanks.
Congrats on everything you have done in education, especially education. I have so many friends in Florida. They thank you for their opportunities for their kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.